Tim Burton's filmography includes a whole lot of classics, ranging from Beetlejuice and Corpse Bride to Edward Scissorhands, but very few fans know that he had taken up a sci-fi dark comedy project called Mars Attacks, with a star-studded cast including Jack Nicholson, Danny DeVito, Martin Short, Sarah Jessica Parker, Pierce Brosnan, and so on. This 1996 film was inspired by a controversial trading cards game, and it went on to attain cult classic status among Burton's fan base. While it might often be buried under some of his more famous works, today we'll be telling you all about the craziest facts and pieces of trivia associated with Mars Attacks. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The film was inspired by a deck of controversial trading cards. Interestingly, the film adaptation of Mars Attacks started with a sci-fi trading card series developed by Topps in 1962. These cards were filled with the artworks of sci-fi artists Wally Wood and Norman Saunders, who designed a storyboard about a bunch of Martians who invade Earth. While Topps Company Inc. was best known for its baseball cards, it launched this bubblegum trading card series with 55 cards that soon became collectibles. The story revealed that the planet of Mars was doomed to explode, and the corrupt Martian government was trying its best to colonize Earth and safeguard their future. The cards were packed with futuristic fight scenes and strange, technologically advanced but bizarre methods of Martian attacks. They even came up with strange ways to torture and kill humans, and targeted specific nations until the human expeditionary forces came together to counterattack the Martian population. While designing the cards, Len Brown and Woody Gelman made the Martians' design a bit grotesque, and they sought inspiration from EC's Weird Science comic books. One of the comic covers from 1952 was illustrated by Wally Wood, which depicted UFOs landing on Earth and releasing a group of large-brained, hideous aliens that became the inspiration for the trading cards. The creators also sought inspiration from a 1955 cult sci-fi film, This Island Earth, for the trading cards, and Tim Burton then reproduced these same designs for the Mars Attacks film. Unfortunately, the trading cards soon gained quite a controversial reputation among parents due to the implied sexual content and explicit gore in these cards, and the company had no option but to cease production. Some of these cards showed a giant insect attacking a naked woman in a shower, while another one involved a dog being vaporized in front of a small child. Len Brown talked about the bad publicity that got them into hot water, and more people started questioning how they could put such images on cards designed for little kids. When newspaper editorials started criticizing the franchise, a district attorney even reached out to Topps' president to complain, finally leading to the set being discontinued. However, the creators did not anticipate that the cards would gain an underground following. Topps eventually reissued these cards in 1984. They also expanded the franchise into comic books and action figures, while the first edition cards from the 1962 set were being auctioned off for over $3,600 for just one card. Clearly, the cards had left quite an impressive mark on fans, and over time, Tim Burton recognized their potential and turned them into a film. Jack Nicholson had two major roles in the film and accepted them in the blink of an eye. Jack Nicholson was one of the most famous actors associated with this project, and Tim Burton reached out to him for two roles in Mars Attacks. After having worked with him in the 1989 Batman film, he immediately accepted the offer and portrayed Las Vegas developer Art Land, as well as US President James Dale in the film. Interestingly, he was not the first choice for these parts, and Burton had first reached out to Warren Beatty to play these roles. He dropped out of the part while his wife, Annette Bening, remained in the film's cast, and Burton then tried to cast Paul Newman, who was concerned over the card's controversy and themes of violence. Finally, Burton briefly considered Michael Keaton for the role before bringing Jack Nicholson on board. Eventually, this turned out to be quite an excellent decision, and fans have even stated that he did such a good job at depicting President Dale that it's hard to imagine anyone else in this role. From the protagonists to background characters, no one's fate was secured. Even though Tim Burton managed to cast a bunch of A-listers, The film made a bold decision to kill off most of these characters in comedic and graphic ways. Some of the cast members who were killed off included Glenn Close, Jack Black, Michael J. Fox, and Jack Nicholson. Some other names that did not make it to the film's end were Martin Short, Danny DeVito, Rod Steiger, Pierce Brosnan, and Sarah Jessica Parker. And out of the 22 people listed in the opening credits, only 7 managed to survive until the end. These surviving characters were played by Natalie Portman, Sylvia Sidney, Jim Brown, Pam Greer, Annette Bening, Tom Jones, and Lucas Haas, while many other A-listers didn't make it out alive. In this way, Mars Attacks promoted the message that no movie star was safe, and it added to the film's shock value when such big names were killed off on screen in the most violent ways imaginable. Ack Ack. All about the Martians' language. While this film depicted the Martians in quite a peculiar manner, one of the things that stood out the most among fans was their nonsensical language. They typically repeated the words ack, 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 which has become their signature language across all Mars Attacks media. Screenwriters Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski revealed that this was their idea and that they had written ack, ack, ack as placeholder dialogues, as they had no idea what the Martians were supposed to sound like. Eventually, Tim Burton was trying to make a storyboard reel using a tape recorder, where one of the actors just said these words out loud when it was time for the Martians to speak. Even though this was an improvisation, it sort of stuck with them, and the screenwriters were also quite amused to learn that Burton had decided to use their placeholder dialogues as the Martians' official language. They achieved this sound effect by taking the sound of a duck quacking and then playing it backwards, which gave it an otherworldly effect and made it convincing enough to be the Martians' language. The plotline where Slim Witmans' yodeling song destroyed the Martians. There is no doubt that Burton had plenty of strange ideas for this film, and one of them involved a plotline where Slim Witmans' song, Indian Love Call, destroyed the Martians. Whitman was a country western singer known for his tendency to include a stunning yodel in his songs, but the later generations often regarded this music as a joke. The film incorporates this by including a scene where the only way to stop the Martians is by making their heads explode by playing Whitman's Indian Love Call, which turned out to be a way bigger gag than the creators ever expected. In fact, many obituaries for the singer's death even began with headlines about how his song was incorporated into the movie, and even Tim Burton could never have imagined the impact of his sci-fi silliness and how it instantly causes fans to think of Mars Attacks whenever they hear this song. All about the design choices for the Martian Girl costume. Lisa Marie played the iconic Martian Girl, and a whole lot of effort went into designing her costume and overall character. Costume designer Colleen Atwood had 2 iconic Hollywood darlings on her mood board, including Marilyn Monroe and Jane Fonda from Barbarella. While the references to these legendary actors are subtle, you can most definitely see them in the way Martian Girl tries to seduce Martin Short's character. In order to make her costume as smooth as possible, it had no zippers or buttons, and Lisa Marie had to be sewn into it every single time she had to appear in a scene. Marie also talked about the torturous blonde wig that she had to wear for this role, and that it was so heavy that it left a scar on her head. Her hairdo involved 2 separate blonde wigs made with real human hair that were stitched together for the desired effect, and while it was not a pleasant experience, Marie fondly talked about how it was all worth it in the end. The hotel demolition scene was entirely real. Tim Burton has never shied away from bold shooting choices, and Mars Attacks even included a scene involving an actual hotel demolition in Las Vegas. The landmark hotel and casino had been an iconic structure since the 1960s, and it was known for housing famous celebrities such as Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. It was considered to be a popular destination on the Vegas Strip, but it eventually declined in popularity and was slated to be demolished in November 1995. After the place was permanently shut in 1990, Burton hoped to immortalize it in his projects, and he sent a crew to shoot the building's 17-second-long controlled implosion in 1995. This footage was later incorporated in Mars Attacks, in a scene where the Martian saucers used death rays to destroy the fictional Galaxy Hotel. Burton wanted to use stop-motion animation to shoot Mars attacks for the longest time. Initially, Tim Burton had hoped to use stop-motion animation to design the Martians used in the film, and he particularly wanted to pay homage to the works of Ray Harryhausen. Just like his former projects, Burton wanted the special effects to look cheap and fake, and he tried to hire Harry Selick to supervise the stop motion. Unfortunately, Selick was quite busy at the time, and Burton then hired Barry Purvis to lead an international team of 70 animators to work on this project. After about 8 months of work, they started gathering test footage and studied the works of Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard to seek inspiration for the Martians' movements. Unfortunately, Warner Brothers had not greenlit their budget requirements at the time, and Burton then had to change his mind and use computer animation instead. While Barry Purvis was not credited for his stop-motion work on the project, stop-motion supervisors Ian McKinnon and Peter Saunders did receive character design credit. With a restricted budget of $75 million, producer Larry J. Franco decided to commission a visual effects company called Industrial Light and Magic to make a test reel before finally handing them the project. All about the CGI and special effects team's efforts to bring Tim Burton's vision to life. Warner Digital Studios was all set to work on scenes involving global destruction, the flying saucer sequences, as well as the Martian landing in Nevada, in addition to working on the practical effects and building scale models of structures. Meanwhile, Jim Mitchell from Industrial Light and Magic worked with Larry Franco to take over the animation and was initially under the impression that it would be all stop motion. While the project involved a lot of CGI, David Andrews talked about how the CG was only meant to deal with some obvious stop motion issues. Tim Burton did not want the film to have an animated look, and instead, he wanted it to look photoreal. In fact, Burton even went as far as to credit David Andrews as a visual effects supervisor so that fans didn't think that there was any animation involved. The film's production can best be described as a hybrid between stop motion and CG, which is evident with the motion blur visible on the CG characters. However, Mitchell and Andrews did work together to get rid of the spliny quality that was evident in most animations at the time, which essentially meant that the keyframe eased out to the next. To explain it in easier terms, there were scenes where the Martians' hands were far apart in one frame, while the next frame had a huge blur on the palms. When Andrews learned that this was how RenderMan did motion blur, he tried to paint it out, but it was seemingly not possible to do so. Andrews then worked with the software to figure out a dry brush feature where the cells can be painted to fill the gaps with a matte finish. They also faced challenges in scenes involving splattered brains and shattering skeletons, and had to go through a lot of trial and error before figuring out the best way to create the green ooze or blood that dripped out or oozed out of these brain explosions. Andrews also revealed that they used cheap tricks and low-tech effects to execute scenes where the Martians used their lasers to blast people or crash through objects. They even used rough animatics to work out how to do motion control camera moves, and worked with Pat Sweeney, the director of miniature photography, to film the scenes that took place in the flying saucers' interiors. After achieving the desired background through miniature photography, they put in their miniature CG Martians to shoot these scenes. How did they model the Martians? Barry Purvis had already developed the stop-motion and 12-inch articulated models of the Martians, but they faced some trouble with the Martians with glass helmets on. In order to do any facial work, they faced challenges where the helmets had to be taken off and their faces had to be changed before putting the helmet back on, and they were trying to create the mats for the same. Finally, Jim Mitchell came up with the idea to do glass in CG, which was essentially an automatic mat that made things transparent. He experimented with this idea by using a plate from Jumanji's set and then building one of the Martians in a glass helmet. He also added the Martian's green suit and death ray gun and tried to make the character walk around in the desired animation and composition. Larry Franco was quite impressed with the result, but they had to work on it a little more before finally presenting it to Tim Burton. Mitchell also had help from animation supervisor David Andrews, who oversaw his attempts to take a car from Jumanji's animation attempts and then animated it upside down before creating a scene where the Martians try to steal it. They managed to turn it into quite a fun scenario and animated the Martian spaceship, the Sarge Martian, and even excelled at getting their bouncy, weird walk right. Mitchell also used CG to scan the characters and use a 3D painting system to capture the details and intricacy that went into modeling the characters. Even though they had achieved these effects for the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, it was a whole new challenge to animate bipedal, human-like characters, and Mitchell more than stepped up to it. David Andrews also worked with him to ensure that the characters didn't feel too animated as per Tim Burton's wishes, but they always found ways to sneak in some telltale features that gave away their animated origins, such as eyeball darts. Andrews pointed out that animation made it possible to make their eyes seem lifelike and twinkly, but it was tricky to get those details past Neil Michka, who almost always caught these tricks while going through the project frame by frame. However, it was all part of the aesthetic to make the characters seem lifelike, and there's no doubt that they did a fantastic job of getting these details just right in the final product. How did they gather such an A-list cast for a B-grade movie spoof? Many fans wondered how Tim Burton managed to collect such an A-list cast. And as it turns out, it was all because of Jack Nicholson. Initially, agents weren't interested in seeing their star clients play in a B-grade movie spoof, and Burton even thought that they might have to cancel the movie. However, Jack Nicholson then accepted a double role in the film, and soon enough, there was a huge line of celebrities interested in playing far more roles than they ever needed. This led to the addition of celebrities such as Martin Short, Danny DeVito, Michael Fox, Glenn Close, and Pierce Brosnan, among others, even if most of these actors played characters that were slated to die in a cartoonish manner by the end of the film. However, there were a couple of actors, such as Susan Sarandon and Hugh Grant, who were initially considered for the roles of Barbara and Professor Kessler, respectively. Eventually, these roles went to other big names, and some actors, such as Johnny Depp, even turned down a role in the film. When Glenn Close finally landed the role of Marcia Dale, she had tough competition among actresses such as Meryl Streep, Diane Keaton, and Stockard Channing, who were all in the frame to star as the First Lady. The Beetlejuice Easter eggs that slipped under the radar. Tim Burton is known for leaving some signature marks that connect all of his films. Mars Attacks was no exception to this. The film had incorporated some red and green skeletons that were first spotted in Beetlejuice in 1988, and these skeletons can be clearly spotted in the scene with Barbara and Adams in Juno's office. These skeletons were a residual of the humans who had been disintegrated by the Martians' ray guns, and Burton explained that they were either red or green because the film was slated for a Christmas release. How was the US military involved in the project? Interestingly, the US military was initially looped in to supply the ships, planes, and soldiers in the film to make the fight sequences as realistic as possible. However, this eventually didn't work out, and the military forces believed that the scene where Slim Witmans' song blows up the Martians' heads made it seem like the United States Army was not as effective at fighting alien invaders as compared to the singer. The movie is a satirical spin on Independence Day and classic B movies. While developing the script for the film, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski had incorporated several military features and a finale scene that was inspired by the cult classic film Independence Day. Even though the film was inspired by the trading card game by Topps, several elements, such as the destruction of Washington, hostile aliens, and DC landmarks, made the film seem like a satirical spin on classic B-grade alien movies. Interestingly, Independence Day's writers, Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, were aware of Burton's plans to develop a sci-fi parody film. However, they wanted to write a serious alien invasion movie, and they knew that it would not perform so well if they released it after Mars Attacks in August. To deal with this, they reworked the concept, gave the film a new spin as Independence Day, and released it on the 4th of July weekend. What was the deal with the Martian names? While we've explored the Martians' silly ack language, they also had quite ridiculous names. In fact, two aliens were referred to as Ben Dur and Done Dat, which is essentially a clever spin on the phrase, been there, done that. Mars Attacks was supposed to be a much darker film. While Mars Attacks was promoted as satire, it was originally supposed to be a much darker film before the script underwent a bunch of changes. Among other things, the original script had a scene where the burning cows run over Mr. Lee and trample him to death while his family is forced to watch. In another scene, the White House decorator was supposed to decorate the Ronald Reagan room when the Martians break in and disintegrate him. And this was just one of the many disturbing sequences where the Martians attacked other citizens, including the employee at the Donut World, police officers, and Richie Norris. In fact, the scene ends with Mr. Bryan's death while Richie watches the building burst into flames and people turn into skeletons in front of his eyes. The film also had an alternate ending where the Martians kill Byron and drag his corpse away while planes fly overhead, and the Martians explode after being exposed to Slim Witmans' music. The original script also had an award ceremony scene where Taffy talks about Byron while Louise, Cedric, and Neville cry in the audience. Unfortunately, the film eventually had a much lighter note, and there were so many screenwriters attached to the project that the original vision was completely changed along the way. Tim Burton reunited with several collaborators for this project. While Tim Burton gathered quite a stellar cast for this film, he also collaborated with many actors whom he had worked with in the past. This included Jack Nicholson, who played the Joker in Burton's 1989 Batman film, as well as Danny DeVito from Burton's 1992 Batman Returns film. He had also previously worked with Sylvia Sidney in Beetlejuice and Olan Jones in Edward Scissorhands, as well as Sarah Jessica Parker and Lisa Marie from Ed Wood. What went on behind the scenes to execute Sarah Jessica Parker's iconic head transplant scene? One of the most jaw-dropping scenes in the film involved a Martian experiment wherein they tried to remove Pierce Brosnan and Sarah Jessica Parker's heads from their bodies. In fact, the Martians even tried to place their heads on a dog's body, and Jim Mitchell revealed that it was quite tricky to place a CG dog body attached to a human head in a miniature spaceship. They shot Pierce Brosnan against a blue screen and put a collar on his neck to know the dividing point while animating it, but it was a bigger challenge to place Sarah Jessica Parker's head on a chihuahua. Interestingly, they used Tim Burton's actual chihuahua for the scene, and Mitchell talked about how it was one of his favorite scenes to create as it reflected the absurd, silly nature of the movie. One of the scenes was a parody of a Winston Churchill speech. A scene where General Decker shouts at the Martian leader about how they will never surrender was actually inspired by British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's 1940 speech about an invasion of Great Britain by Nazi Germany. The original speech included phrases such as, "We shall fight on the beaches, on the landing grounds, in the fields and in the streets, and we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." This was taken as the inspiration for General Decker's speech, where he also declares that they'll fight on the beaches and the streets and will never surrender until they win. This film also marked Sylvia Sidney's final film role. Mars Attacks has been listed as Sylvia Sidney's last film role as Grandma Florence Norris before she passed away in 1999. She had worked with Tim Burton in the past in Beetlejuice, wherein she gained attention for her role as Juno, a caseworker in the afterlife. The film's budget ballooned drastically at Warner Brothers. While Burton had initially approached Warner Brothers Studios with the idea for Mars Attacks, they bought the film rights to the trading cards on his behalf and slated it for a summer release in 1996. When Jems completed his first script draft, it was budgeted at $260 million, but Warner Brothers wanted to wrap the film up with just $60 million. They tried to rework the script and even asked Jems to get rid of the opening sequence with burning cows, but Jems was insistent that there was no better opening sequence that would have the same impact. At this point, the studio dismissed him, but Burton's producers still wanted a $100 million budget. Finally, Warner Brothers capped the budget at $75 million, which resulted in the initial stop-motion work being tossed to the side, while industrial light and magic was brought in for CGI and animation effects. The budget restraints also resulted in at least 37 characters being cut from the final screenplay, which involved a suburban housewife, a televangelist, and many of Professor Kessler's students and colleagues. more than 10 scriptwriters were involved in dozens of script rewrites. In 1993, Jonathan Gems suggested a Mars Attacks card-inspired film to Tim Burton, who visualized it as a disaster film project with an ensemble cast. However, Gems's vision was a lot more inspired by the 1974 film The Towering Inferno, which led him to write a script that almost seemed like a portrait of America with a range of characters that came from all kinds of walks of life. He also wanted the action to take place in a variety of iconic locations, ranging from California and New York to Mount Rushmore, while Tim Burton wanted to use this as an opportunity to pay homage to Edward D. Wood Jr.'s films such as Plan 9 from Outer Space. He also envisioned this project as an opportunity to pay homage to other sci-fi B-movies from the 1950s, including Invaders from Mars, It Came from Outer Space, Target Earth, and so on. After setting up the film with Warner Brothers, Jonathan Gems worked on the screenplay for quite some time before the studio dismissed him over budget constraints. He left after recommending Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski as replacements, who then developed the script by July 1995. With them in the lead, the project became less satirical, and they also rewrote the entire third act before Gems eventually returned to the project. At this point, he had written at least 12 drafts that constituted about 90% of the final film, and he was credited with the screen story as well as the screenplay. He even dedicated his work to Tim Burton and declared that Burton co-wrote the screenplay with him and refused any credit for it. How did Pam Greers secure her part? When Tim Burton tried to schedule Pam Greers' audition for the role, he asked her if she could fly to Los Angeles for the same. However, she refused to travel even though she wanted to on account of her dog being terminally ill. Even after Burton called her many times, Greer refused to leave her dog alone to travel for the audition, and Burton then decided that she was well suited for the role. Since her character in the film refuses to leave her two sons, Greer's decision not to leave her dog behind was enough of an audition for Burton to give her the part. All about Martin Amos's involvement in the script. Even though we've explored all about the screenwriters involved in Mars Attacks, very few fans know that Martin Amos was also brought in to work on this project. Amos is an acclaimed British author who has been nominated for the Booker Prize twice, and he was considered to be a brilliant writer who knew how to create compelling characters and storylines. He first got involved with the project due to his friendship with John Davidson, who was a producer on the film. Since he had previously written the 1980 sci-fi thriller Saturn III, Davidson agreed to let him work on this project and develop a script. Unfortunately, Warner Brothers did not approve of it, and Amos eventually stated that while he liked the film, it did not include a single word he had written. Why did Howard Stern claim credit for Mars Attacks' finale? Amidst a silly controversy, Howard Stern claimed that the entire finale scene where Slim Witmans' song destroys the Martians was inspired by his sketch for WNBC in 1982. The so-called King of All Media claimed that the film ripped off his Slim Witman versus the Midget Aliens from Mars sketch, and he even pointed out all the similarities on air. Stern even said that the similarities had freaked him out, while his co-host, Robin Quivers, suggested that the writers might have just been paying tribute to him. However, Stern was not entirely convinced by this, and he even later did an interview with Tim Burton during The Howard Stern Show, where he joked that he would never sue him because he loves him a lot, even if he doesn't believe that it was just a coincidence. However, Burton maintained that the parallels were surreal and that it was just a coincidence. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we've explored some of the craziest facts associated with Mars Attacks, ranging from the fact that it was inspired by a card game to other details regarding the animation choices, CGI effects, and casting choices. While it's a cult classic among fans who enjoy a touch of dark comedy in the sci-fi genre, it is still quite underrated, and we hope this video gives you a new recommendation for your next movie night. Do share your favorite bits of trivia in the comments below, and let us know what film you'd like us to cover next.